In 1984, several babies died at Saint Agnes Hospital. Or at least, that's what the record said. 40 years later, a DNA test exposes a terrifying possibility. Some of those children never died at all. Now investigator Bennett Crowe must untangle a buried conspiracy of switched identities, stolen families, and a murder hidden for decades beneath hospital walls, because someone at Saint Agnes believed they had the right to decide which mothers deserved to keep their children, and they killed to protect that secret. The Saint Agnes Hospital Babies. A story by 10 Chapters Audiobooks. Chapter 1. The DNA Surprise. The rain had settled over the city sometime after midnight and never bothered leaving. By 9 in the morning, Bennett Crowe sat behind his desk with a chipped black coffee mug in one hand and an unopened electricity bill in the other, listening to Miles Davis drift softly through the office speakers. The trumpet sounded tired in a way Bennett respected. His office occupied the second floor, above a locksmith shop that smelled permanently of machine oil and wet concrete. The radiator hissed with theatrical resentment. 2 bankers' boxes full of cold case files leaned dangerously near the window. Bennett ignored all of it. He was studying a grainy surveillance, still from a 6-year-old insurance fraud investigation, when his computer chimed. New client inquiry. He almost let it sit. Most inquiries fell into 3 categories: conspiracy theorists, people convinced their spouses were poisoning them, or adult children certain the police had missed something after 30 years and 6 documentaries. Instead, he clicked it open. The subject line read, "I think I was given to the wrong family." Bennett took another sip of coffee. "Well," he muttered to the empty office, "that's new." The message itself was short. "Mr. Crowe, my name is Claire Morrow. I recently took a genealogy DNA test and received results that make no sense. I've spoken with the company multiple times. They insist the matches are accurate. I believe there may have been a mistake at Saint Agnes Hospital in 1984. I know this sounds absurd, but I think my mother knew something before she died. Claire Morrow." Bennett reread the line about the mother. Most people buried the important detail in the middle. He replied with exactly 3 sentences. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., bring every document you have, and don't use the word absurd until I've had coffee. Binchef." Claire Morrow arrived at precisely 9:58 the next morning, carrying a canvas tote bag stuffed with folders. Bennett liked punctual people. They usually lied less. She stood near the office doorway for half a second before stepping inside, taking in the clutter without comment. Mid-40s, dark wool coat, minimal makeup, controlled posture. The kind of composure that suggested either emotional maturity or years of practice holding herself together in public, possibly both. "You're Bennett Crowe," she said. "That depends who's asking. I'm your 10 o'clock. Then yes, a faint smile flickered across her face before disappearing again. Good, Bennett thought. She still remembers how. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. Claire sat carefully, placing the tote bag beside her feet. "You drink coffee?" Bennett asked. "No." Smart woman. He sat down, opened a yellow legal pad, and clicked a pen. "Start with the part you almost left out of the email." Claire looked briefly surprised. "The mother line? People edit themselves when they write. Usually the truth is hiding in whatever they tried not to emphasize." For the first time since entering the office, Claire looked uncertain. "My mother died 3 years ago," she said. "Cancer." Bennett nodded once. She was nervous, private, especially about hospitals. "Any particular hospital?" Claire hesitated. Saint Agnes, there it was. Bennett leaned back slightly. "Tell me about the DNA test." Claire opened one of the folders and handed him several printed pages. "I did one of those ancestry kits last winter, mostly out of curiosity. My father died when I was 22. I don't have siblings. I thought maybe I'd find distant cousins. You found closer, she nodded. A man named Daniel Pike showed up as a probable sibling match. Bennett scanned the report. Shared DNA percentages. Chromosome overlap. Estimated relationship probability. Not ambiguous. Did you contact him? Eventually. And? He thought I was a scammer. Reasonable. Claire almost smiled again. He took another test through a second company. Same result. And your parents? My mother insisted there had to be some mistake. Before she died? Yes. Did she explain why? Claire shook her head slowly. She became angry whenever I brought it up. Not defensive exactly. Frightened, Bennett tapped the papers lightly against the desk. Did she ever mention adoption? Never. Affairs? No. Saint Agnes specifically? Claire stared at the rain crawling down the office window. When I was a child, I asked her once where I was born. Most people answer normally. She froze. Bennett said nothing. She told me never to ask questions about Saint Agnes Hospital again. The room went quiet except for the hiss of the radiator. Bennett studied her for several moments, not dramatizing, not performing grief, just trying to understand the shape of something that had never fit properly. Tell me about Daniel Pike. He's 42, lives in Rochester, works in logistics. His mother died in 1984. Cause? Claire swallowed. Murder. That landed heavily enough to silence even the jazz. Bennett leaned forward slightly. Now we're getting somewhere. An hour later, Claire spread old records across Bennett's desk. Birth certificate, hospital discharge forms, pediatric records, family photographs. Most people thought investigations began with dramatic revelations. In Bennett's experience, they began with paper. He studied the birth certificate carefully. Issued by Saint Agnes Hospital, March 14, 1984. Female infant, Claire Elizabeth Morrow. At first glance, nothing unusual. Then Bennett narrowed his eyes. Interesting. Claire looked up immediately. What? He rotated the document toward her and pointed at the timestamp formatting. See this? 2:14 a.m.? The font alignment. Claire frowned. I don't understand. This form was digitally reformatted sometime after the original issue. You can tell that from the font? I can tell because the timestamp uses a spacing standard hospitals didn't adopt until the early 90s. Claire stared at him. You're serious? I rarely joke about typography. Bennett stood and crossed to a filing cabinet near the wall. After a moment of digging, he pulled out an old evidence binder from another medical fraud case. Saint Agnes used typewritten formatting in the 80s, he said, flipping pages. Different spacing, different alignment. Claire's face slowly drained of color. So somebody changed it. Looks that way. Why? That, Bennett said, is the expensive question. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Claire looked suddenly smaller than when she'd entered. Not physically, but emotionally, like the floor beneath 42 years of identity had quietly begun collapsing. My parents loved me, she said softly, almost to herself. Bennett nodded once. I'm sure they did. But if this is true, he finished the sentence for her. You don't know who was supposed to take you home. Silence stretched between them. Then Claire reached into the bottom of the tote bag and removed one final item, a yellowed newspaper clipping. Bennett took it carefully. Local woman killed in apparent robbery. Below the headline was a grainy photograph of a young woman with dark hair and wary eyes. Evelyn Pike, age 23, killed 3 weeks after giving birth. Bennett stared at the article for several seconds. Then he noticed something odd. The clipping had been folded many times over the years, not stored, handled, repeatedly. Your mother kept this? He asked. In a jewelry box under her bed. Did she know who Evelyn Pike was? I don't know. Bennett looked again at the photograph. The article described a late-night attack near a bus stop. No suspects. Purse missing. Random robbery. Maybe. But random crimes rarely stayed folded inside hidden jewelry boxes for 40 years. Bennett reached for his coffee. Cold. Terrific. He drank it anyway. Then he looked at Claire and said the thing she had likely feared hearing since walking into his office. I think your mother knew exactly who Evelyn Pike was. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, and somewhere beneath 4 decades of buried paperwork, somebody's carefully protected secret began to move. Chapter 2. The Dead Mother. Retired detectives always picked the same kinds of places. Quiet diners, half-empty bars, coffee shops where nobody asked questions. Hugo Wren had chosen a diner beside the interstate with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone Hun. Bennett arrived 10 minutes early. Wren arrived 12 minutes late, which told Bennett 2 things immediately. The man wanted control of the conversation, and age had not improved his personality. Hugo Wren moved stiffly, but not weakly, broad-shouldered beneath a weathered brown coat, late 60s. Heavy jaw, eyes permanently narrowed, as if the world had disappointed him repeatedly, and with enthusiasm, he slid into the booth opposite Bennett. You always look this cheerful? Only around retired law enforcement. The waitress arrived with coffee. Wren nodded at Bennett's untouched cup. You already had some. I like having options. The waitress left. Rain streaked the diner windows in silver lines while trucks hissed along the highway outside. Wren folded thick hands together. You said this was about Evelyn Pike. It is. That case is older than some wars. Still dead, though. Wren stared at him for a moment. You always talk like that. Only when people ask obvious questions. For the first time, the retired detective gave the faintest hint of amusement. Then it disappeared. What do you want to know? Everything. That's not how conversations work. Bennett slid a photocopy of Claire's DNA report across the table. Wren looked down at it and went still. Tiny reaction. Half a second. Enough. You recognize the name Saint Agnes, Bennett said quietly. Wren leaned back. Everybody in this city recognizes Saint Agnes. Not like that. The older man said nothing. Bennett waited. Silence was useful. People rushed to fill it eventually. Wren lasted longer than most. Finally. What exactly are you suggesting? I don't suggest things, Bennett said. I notice them. That sounds exhausting. It's worse for other people. Another flicker of reluctant amusement. Then Wren sighed heavily. Evelyn Pike was 23. Waitress. Single mother. Lived in a 3rd-floor apartment over on Mercer Street. You think she was killed intentionally? I think somebody wanted her quiet. Why? Wren rubbed a thumb slowly against his coffee mug. Because she wouldn't stop calling Saint Agnes. There it was. Bennett felt the case shift slightly beneath his feet. What was she asking for? Records, meetings, explanations. About her child. We assumed so. Assumed? Wren gave him a sharp look. You know how many cases detectives carry at once? Enough to miss things. That's supposed to impress me? No. Just calibrating expectations. The waitress returned briefly to refill coffee. Neither man spoke until she left again. Finally, Bennett said, Walk me through the night she died. Wren stared out the rain-covered window. She got off work around 11:30. Witness saw her walking toward the bus stop. About 10 minutes later, somebody heard shouting, Robbery? That's what it looked like. But Wren's jaw tightened. Her purse was found 2 blocks away, with cash still inside. Bennett said nothing. Back then, Wren continued, we figured maybe the killer panicked. But you didn't believe that? No. Why? Wren met his eyes directly now. Because Evelyn Pike looked terrified for weeks before she died. The diner suddenly felt smaller. Bennett took out his notebook. "Tell me." Wren hesitated. Then, she filed 3 separate complaints against Saint Agnes Hospital in less than 2 weeks. What kind of complaints? She claimed they gave her the wrong baby. Even Bennett paused at that. Not visibly, but internally. Pieces began rearranging themselves. What happened to the complaints? They disappeared. How convenient. Hospital said she was emotionally unstable after childbirth. Classic. Wren nodded grimly. Different era. Easier to dismiss women back then, and easier to bury paperwork. The retired detective didn't answer, which was answer enough. Outand. An hour later, Bennett stood beneath a gray sky outside the former Saint Agnes Hospital. The building had closed 15 years earlier. Tall brick structure, narrow windows, weather-blackened stone saints above the entrance. A place built to inspire trust now looked like it specialized in withholding oxygen. The parking lot sat mostly empty, except for a few maintenance vehicles. Bennett stood in the drizzle, studying the facade. Hospitals absorbed emotion, fear, relief, death, hope. Enough years of it, and the walls themselves seemed to remember. His phone buzzed. "Claire, you found something?" she asked immediately. "I spoke with the original detective, and he believed your biological mother was trying to expose the hospital." Silence. Then, "Oh my God, easy. We don't know what she discovered yet. But you believe me now." Bennett glanced up at the dark hospital windows. "I believed you when you brought organized paperwork." That earned a small breath of laughter through the phone. Then her voice tightened again. "What if my mother knew?" "Which one?" Another silence. Rawer this time. "I don't know how to ask that question anymore." Bennett understood that better than she realized. Cold cases changed identities. Not just outcomes. People built entire lives around assumptions. Parents, children, marriages. Then one buried fact surfaced, and suddenly every memory had to be retranslated. "I'll let you know what I find," he said. Before she could respond, another voice interrupted faintly in the background. Male. Distorted by distance. Claire spoke away from the phone briefly, then returned. "Sorry. Someone dropped off a package." "What kind of package?" A pause. "I don't know." Bennett's instincts sharpened instantly. "Claire, I haven't opened it yet." "Don't." Her breathing changed slightly. "Why?" "Because people usually don't send anonymous packages 40 years late to congratulate you on family discovery." Another pause. "You think somebody knows. I think somebody's nervous." The line went quiet. Then Claire said softly, "There's no return address." Bennett turned slowly back towards St. Agnes Hospital. Rain slid down the old stone saints above the entrance like tears. "Claire," he said, "when you open it, do not touch anything inside until I get there." "What if it's nothing?" "It never is." 4 minutes later, Bennett climbed the stairs to Claire Morrow's townhouse, carrying latex gloves in one coat pocket and growing unease in the other. Claire stood waiting in the doorway, pale, rigid. On the dining room table sat a large manila envelope, already opened. "Please tell me you ignored the one instruction I gave you for a good reason." "I thought it might be documents." "What was it?" Claire pointed silently inside the envelope. Bennett stepped closer. Photographs, black and white, old, slightly blurred. He pulled on gloves and lifted the first one carefully. A young woman exiting St. Agnes Hospital. Evelyn Pike. Second photo. Evelyn arguing with someone near a parked car. Third photo. Evelyn turning sharply toward the camera. Fear visible even through grainy film. In the final photo. Bennett stopped. Claire watched his face carefully. "What?" He held up the picture. Evelyn Pike stood near a bus stop the night she died. Behind her, partially obscured beneath a streetlight, stood a woman in a nurse's uniform, watching her. Bennett studied the figure carefully. then narrowed his eyes because even beneath the blur and shadows, one detail stood out clearly. The woman wore a Saint Agnes identification badge. Chapter 3. The Baby Ward. The basement of Saint Agnes Hospital smelled faintly of wet cardboard and old disinfectant. Not clean, just preserved. Bennett Crowe stood at the bottom of the concrete stairwell, while a maintenance worker unlocked the archive gate with visible reluctance. "You've got 2 hours," the man said. "That's optimistic." The man didn't smile. The chain came loose with a metallic scrape that echoed down the corridor. Fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, illuminating rows of beige walls stained darker near the floor from decades of leaks and winter salt. Hospitals aged differently than other buildings. Even abandoned ones still felt occupied somehow, not by ghosts. Bennett had never believed in ghosts, but fear lingered in places designed to contain it. The maintenance worker pointed toward the end of the hallway. "Records room's down there. Half the lights don't work." "Excellent." Bennett walked alone into the corridor. The archive room was disappointingly ordinary. No hidden cabinets. No cinematic stacks of secret evidence waiting beneath dust sheets. Just shelves, boxes, labels, the machinery of bureaucracy quietly decaying in the dark. Bennett slipped on latex gloves and began working through neonatal records from March and April of 1984. Most were routine: intake forms, feeding schedules, medication logs, discharge paperwork. Paper had rhythms. Once you studied enough of it, normal systems developed a kind of invisible consistency. The human eye stopped noticing it consciously, but Bennett's mind tracked it anyway. That was why anomalies bothered him so quickly. An hour passed before he found the first one. A nursery transfer log. Handwritten, "Baby girl, admitted 0210. Feeding, 0305. Medication, 0340. Transfer authorization, 0512. Normal enough, but clipped beside it sat a separate observation sheet, placing the same infant in nursery observation at 0458. Bennett frowned slightly. The notation itself didn't mean much. Babies moved in and out of observation constantly. But the sequence bothered him. The transfer authorization had already been initiated, yet the infant was still logged inside the nursery nearly an hour later. Possible, just untidy. Still, he turned back several pages, then several more, looking for comparison. Most neonatal logs moved cleanly. Authorization, movement, discharge, follow-up. This one wandered, as if the paperwork had been reconstructed after the fact by somebody working backward from memory. Bennett photographed the pages carefully, then kept going. Further down the stack, another inconsistency surfaced. Not larger, smaller, which usually meant more important. Newborn identification cards were stored alphabetically inside thin plastic sleeves. Each contained an infant ID number, the mother's surname, a delivery timestamp, and an attending nurse notation. Simple system, except one sequence repeated. Bennett laid the cards side by side beneath the flashlight. Same numbering prefix. One digit altered manually, not crossed out. Corrected, cleanly enough that most people would never question it. But the replacement ink sat slightly darker against the paper fibers. A second entry had been made after the original dried. Bennett leaned back slowly in his chair. Not proof, not even close. But hospitals did not manually reissue neonatal identifiers without explanation. And there was no explanation attached. Only a tiny notation in the corner. Revised peer admin, administrative revision. Convenient phrase. Meaningless enough to discourage curiosity. He circled it in his notebook twice. Hospitals invented soft language for hard things. By late afternoon, Bennett had built a small pile of copied records beside him. Nothing explosive. That was the unsettling part. If something had happened at St. Agnes, it had not happened carelessly. It had happened administratively, quietly, one corrected line at a time, one adjusted timestamp, one rewritten identifier. Death by paperwork. His eyes drifted across staffing records attached to the nursery logs. One name appeared repeatedly during the same 48-hour period. Naomi Bell, temporary neonatal support staff. Beside several revisions sat another phrase, TMP record adjustment. He stared at it for several seconds. No hospital wrote like that accidentally. It sounded less like medicine and more like accounting. Outside the basement window wells, rainwater slid slowly down the glass. Bennett copied the dates into his notebook. Every revision clustered within 2 days in March 1984. Then the pattern stopped entirely, like someone had sealed a crack before anyone noticed it existed. Naomi Bell's memory care facility overlooked a frozen lake north of the city. Snow drifted lightly across the shoreline as Bennett arrived just after sunset. Inside, the building smelled faintly of tea and antiseptic hand soap. A nurse guided him toward a quiet sitting room near the windows. She has lucid stretches, the nurse explained softly, but sometimes she mixes decades together. Most people do, Bennett replied. Naomi Bell sat wrapped in a pale blue cardigan, staring out at the lake. Tiny woman, sharp cheekbones, eyes still alert beneath the fog of age. She looked up when Bennett entered. You're not from the church? No. Good. They never have interesting questions. Encouraging start. A faint smile flickered across her face before fading again. Bennett sat opposite her without opening his notebook. You worked neonatal at St. Agnes in 1984. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her blanket. Yes. There were documentation revisions that spring. No response. Several involving nursery transfers. Her breathing changed almost imperceptibly. Fear arrived quietly in older people. It rarely announced itself anymore. We were overwhelmed, Naomi said finally. Too many births, too few nurses. Did babies ever leave the nursery before paperwork was completed? She hesitated. Yes, frequently. Another pause. Sometimes. Bennett watched her carefully. Not the words. The delay before them. Did anyone instruct staff to rewrite records? Naomi looked down at her hands. Sister Miriam said corrections prevented confusion. There it was again. Correction. Not falsification. Not replacement. Correction. Language mattered. What kind of confusion? Naomi swallowed. Parents upset. Bracelet problems. Charts not matching immediately. Immediately. Her eyes lifted toward him. For a moment, something sharper emerged through the fog. As if matching later made it better. Bennett remained still. Naomi looked back toward the dark lake. There was yelling that week, she said quietly. One mother kept insisting we'd brought her the wrong child. Do you remember who? No. But the answer came too quickly. Bennett noticed. She frightened people, Naomi continued. Not because she screamed, because she wouldn't stop asking questions. The room went quiet, except for the soft hum of the heating vents. Then Naomi spoke again, without looking at him. I remember paperwork being rewritten after visiting hours. Bennett's expression changed slightly. Not surprise. Alignment. The pieces still did not form a complete picture, but they were beginning to point in the same direction. As he stood to leave, Naomi suddenly caught his sleeve with surprising strength. You should stop digging. Why? Her eyes filled slowly with something older than fear. Regret. Because people convinced themselves they were helping. Bennett drove back through falling snow, with the nursery logs spread across the passenger seat beside him. At a red light, he looked again at the transfer sheet. 0458. The infant was still logged in nursery observation. But according to the surrounding paperwork, preparations for transfer had already begun. Tiny inconsistency, easy to dismiss, easy to overlook, unless the paperwork had not been written in the order events actually happened. Bennett stared through the windshield as snow drifted beneath the streetlights. Then very quietly, mostly to himself, somebody fixed this afterward, and for the first time since Claire Morrow walked into his office, Bennett stopped wondering whether Saint Agnes had made mistakes and started wondering who had decided which mistakes needed hiding. Chapter 4. The Children Who Survived. Claire Morrow arrived the next morning, carrying exhaustion with practiced dignity. She removed her gloves carefully near the office door, while Bennett poured coffee she had not asked for. "I still don't drink coffee," she said. "You're starting to disappoint me." She accepted the mug anyway. Progress. Rain tapped softly against the office windows, while Miles Davis drifted low through the speakers again. Bennett spread several copied records across the desk between them. Claire looked down uneasily. "That's a lot of paper. It gets worse." "Comforting. I try to provide emotional support where possible." For the first time in 2 days, she laughed briefly. Then the sound disappeared as her eyes settled on the neonatal logs. Bennett tapped one page lightly. "I found overlapping documentation tied to your birth window." "What does that mean?" "It means the records don't move cleanly." Claire frowned. "I don't understand." He slid the transfer sheet toward her. "This infant was logged in nursery observation at 0458, and transfer processing had already begun." "That sounds minor." "It is minor." Claire looked up. But paperwork systems are designed specifically to avoid small inconsistencies like this." She studied the forms again. "You think somebody changed them later. I think somebody reconciled them later." The distinction mattered. Claire seemed to recognize that. "You sound careful every time you say it." "I am." "Why?" "Because uncertainty is how you avoid becoming a conspiracy podcast." That earned another reluctant smile. Then her expression faded again. "You really think something happened there?" Bennett leaned back slightly. "I think something was managed there." By afternoon, he had identified 3 additional neonatal files from the same 2-day period containing similar revision patterns. Nothing big, just administrative friction, a rewritten identifier. Missing intermediary logs, transfer timestamps added in different ink, enough to suggest intervention. Not enough to explain why. Claire sat silently while Bennett reviewed the names with her. Marcus Bell, Jenna Voss, Tyler Reed. "Who are they?" she asked. "People born during the same revision window." "You think they were switched too?" "I think their records were altered." "Which means what?" "It means I'm not ready to tell you more than I know." That afternoon, Bennett drove 40 minutes south to a storage facility on the edge of the industrial district. Tyler Reed worked the front desk, 39 years old, thin in the way people became after years of not quite enough. Eyes that moved quickly toward exits before settling on faces. Bennett had seen that particular habit before. It developed in places where adults were temporary. "You're Tyler Reed. Depends what you're selling." "Information." Tyler studied him for a moment, then leaned back. "About what?" "Saint Agnes Hospital, 1984. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise. Something older than surprise. "I was a baby in 1984. "I know." A long pause followed. Outside, a truck reversed slowly across the lot. "My foster file listed St. Agnes as my birth hospital," Tyler said finally. "I looked it up once. Figured I'd find my mother." He laughed once without humor. "Records were incomplete." "They usually were," Bennett said quietly. Tyler looked at him steadily. "You saying that wasn't an accident?" Bennett didn't answer immediately, because the answer mattered. And Tyler Reed had spent 39 years living inside it without knowing. "I'm saying," Bennett said carefully, "that some records from that period were handled in ways that deserve a closer look." Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Then, "So somebody decided where I ended up." "Not a question." Bennett said nothing, which was answer enough. He drove back through late afternoon traffic with Tyler Reed's expression still sitting somewhere behind his eyes. Not grief exactly. The particular stillness of someone who had always suspected the ground beneath them was uneven, and had just been told they were right. Claire looked away toward the rain-darkened window when Bennett returned and told her. Most clients wanted certainty immediately. Claire wanted permission to doubt. That made her easier to trust. My mother hated hospitals, she said quietly after a while. Even television commercials. Bennett glanced toward her. She ever explain why? No. Claire wrapped both hands around the untouched coffee. But after my father died, I found her sitting in the garage once, with all my baby photographs spread across the floor. Looking for what? She didn't know. The answer lingered heavily between them. She kept saying something felt wrong. Bennett said nothing, because grief had a way of reshaping memory after the fact, and because he still didn't know whether Claire's mother had discovered the truth or simply feared it. That evening, Bennett revisited Evelyn Pike's case file. The original police reports were thin. Too thin. Street robbery. Female victim. No witnesses. Case eventually suspended. But now he read the statements differently. Not for what they contained, for what they avoided. One officer described Evelyn as agitated regarding ongoing hospital dispute. No details attached. Another report referenced continued complaints directed at Saint Agnes administration. Again, no specifics. Not ignored. Minimized. Bennett circled the phrase twice. Continued complaints, plural, meaning Evelyn Pike had not made one emotional accusation during postpartum stress. She had returned repeatedly, persistent enough to become memorable. His eyes moved lower down the page. A final notation sat near the bottom of the supplemental report. No further action recommended. No explanation beneath it. No follow-up documentation attached, just closure. Clean, administrative, quiet. The exact kind of language institutions used when they wanted difficult things to stop existing. Outside, thunder rolled softly somewhere beyond the city. Bennett closed the file and stared for a long moment at the reflection in his office window. Then he reached for his phone and dialed Claire. She answered immediately. You found something. Not a question. Bennett looked down at Evelyn Pike's report again. I think your biological mother was treated like a nuisance before she was treated like a victim. Silence. Then Claire asked the question Bennett had been expecting all day. Do you think she was right? Bennett watched rain slide slowly down the glass. I think, he said carefully, she frightened somebody. Chapter 5. The Woman in the Photograph. By Wednesday morning, Bennett Crowe had developed a working theory and distrusted it completely. That was usually a good sign. He sat at his desk with 3 folders open side by side, while weak winter light filtered through the rain-streaked office windows. Miles Davis had given way to Billie Holiday sometime around dawn. Bennett considered that an improvement. On the desk, neonatal revision logs, Evelyn Pike's complaint references, and a personnel file for Sister Miriam Castaigne. The personnel file was thin in the way institutional files often became when somebody had once mattered enough to be protected. Education records, administrative appointments, community awards, fundraising committees. No disciplinary history, no controversy, no useful humanity. Claire arrived carrying fresh photocopies from the county records office. You sleep here? She asked. Only emotionally. She set the papers down beside him. I found donor records tied to Saint Agnes. That got his attention. Claire removed several pages carefully. The hospital ran a private neonatal expansion campaign in the early 80s. Wealthy donors sponsored new maternity facilities. Bennett scanned the names. Judges, developers, political families. One surname appeared repeatedly. Voss. His eyes narrowed slightly. Jenna Voss, Claire said quietly. One of the children born during the revision window. Her family donated to the hospital? Substantially. Claire sank slowly into the chair opposite him. That can't be coincidence. Everything can be coincidence, Bennett replied. The question is statistical density. She stared at him. You really enjoy sounding impossible sometimes. It discourages follow-up questions. He continued reading. Most donations were ordinary philanthropic vanity. Wings, equipment, naming rights. Then Bennett noticed something smaller, a line item buried deep within administrative expenditures. Postnatal Family Services Initiative. No description attached. Funded privately. Temporary authorization. Duration. March-April 1984. Bennett looked again at the date range. Exactly the revision window. Claire saw his expression change. What? He rotated the page toward her and tapped the line once. She frowned. What is that? I don't know yet. But you hate it already. Yes. Whodunit. The Saint Agnes diocesan offices occupied an old stone building downtown that smelled faintly of candle wax and floor polish. Bennett arrived just before noon after discovering that Sister Miriam was still alive, retired. 81. Residing at a church-affiliated residence outside the city, conveniently difficult to access. A young administrator met Bennett in the lobby with the exhausted politeness of someone who managed difficult conversations professionally. Sister Miriam's health is inconsistent, the woman explained. So is mine. She tires easily. I'll try not to become emotionally demanding. That earned a reluctant smile. Good. People revealed more after they smiled once. The administrator led him through quiet corridors lined with framed photographs of charity drives and hospital ceremonies from decades earlier. In every image, Sister Miriam stood near the center without appearing to seek attention. That bothered Bennett slightly. People who naturally accumulated authority rarely needed to announce it. At the end of the hallway, the administrator paused beside a sunlit sitting room. She may not remember everything clearly. I'm counting on selective memory, Bennett said. Sister Miriam sat beside the window reading a gardening magazine. Small woman. Silver hair. Sharp posture. Not fragile. Contained. She looked up calmly when Bennett entered. You're not clergy. Your observational skills remain impressive. I dislike detectives, she said. That saves time. The administrator retreated discreetly, leaving them alone. Sister Miriam folded the magazine carefully in her lap. You're investigating Saint Agnes. Not a question. Bennett sat opposite her. Yes. And someone directed you toward me. Your name appears frequently in administrative records. That's what administrators do. We appear in records. Her voice remained calm, measured, almost soothing. Years of managing frightened families, Bennett thought. Years of learning how to reduce panic with tone alone. You oversaw postnatal services in 1984. I oversaw many things. There were record revisions in the neonatal wing. There were constant record revisions everywhere. Hospitals are chaotic places. True, which made her dangerous. Because truth mixed easily with concealment. Bennett studied her quietly. Most liars tried too hard to deny. Sister Miriam did something more sophisticated. She normalized. There was a woman named Evelyn Pike, Bennett said. Something flickered briefly behind her eyes. Recognition. Gone almost immediately. She accused the hospital of giving her the wrong child. Sister Miriam sighed softly. Grief creates certainty where evidence cannot. She made multiple complaints. So do many frightened mothers. Did you believe she was unstable? I believed she was devastated. Not the same answer, Bennett noticed. She was murdered 3 weeks later. This time, Sister Miriam looked directly at him, steady, unflinching. Yes, she said quietly. And it was tragic. No defensiveness. No surprise. Just distance. Bennett leaned slightly forward. What was the Postnatal Family Services Initiative? The silence lasted only a second too long. Then, A donor support program. For what? Counseling. Placement assistance. Financial guidance. Placement. Temporary care support. Again, soft language. Always softer than the reality beneath it. Did Saint Agnes ever facilitate unofficial adoptions? Sister Miriam's expression hardened for the first time. No. Immediate, controlled, interesting. But children occasionally left hospitals with families other than biological parents, Bennett said. That happened everywhere in those years, she replied calmly. Private arrangements, informal guardianships, women in crisis. You're describing trafficking very politely. Her eyes sharpened. No, she said. I'm describing desperation. The room fell quiet. And for the first time, Bennett saw something beneath her composure. Not guilt, conviction. Which was worse. When Bennett returned to his office that evening, Claire was waiting beside the door, holding a folder against her chest. You talked to her? Yes. And he unlocked the office slowly. She believes what she did was compassionate. Claire went still. What did she do? I'm not certain yet. That answer frustrated her now. He could tell. Good. Frustrated people often revealed themselves more honestly than reassured ones. Inside the office, Bennett removed his coat carefully. Claire watched him. You think wealthy families got babies they wanted. I think vulnerable women entered a system built by people who believed stability could be engineered. That sounds horrifying. It usually does once somebody says it aloud. Claire sat heavily in the chair across from his desk. My mother wasn't wealthy. No. Then why me? Bennett looked at her for a long moment. That, he said quietly, is finally the right question. Chapter 6. The Mothers Who Complained. The first surviving complaint arrived by accident. Bennett found it folded inside a misfilled insurance ledger from Saint Agnes's legal archives 2 days later, which meant either someone had hidden it badly or believed nobody would ever look carefully enough to find it. The document itself was unimpressive. Carbon copy, half-faded ink, administrative formatting. But the heading caught his attention immediately. Patient Concern Report. Complainant. Evelyn Pike. Bennett sat down slowly at the archive table and began reading. The statement was fragmented and emotional. Evelyn described believing nurses repeatedly brought her different infants during overnight feedings. Staff reassured her she was exhausted, hormonal, confused. One sentence had been underlined heavily in pen sometime later. They keep correcting the bracelets after taking the babies away. Bennett stared at the line. Not because it proved anything, because it matched Naomi Bell's language almost exactly. Correction. Not replacement. Correction. The complaint ended with a notation from hospital administration. Matter resolved internally. No explanation attached. Of course not. He set the document down carefully and looked again at Evelyn's handwriting. She had written in small, careful letters, the handwriting of someone used to being precise, not the scrawl of panic, the deliberate script of someone who wanted to be believed. 23 years old, 3 weeks after giving birth, still writing careful sentences in a hospital complaint form while the institution closed ranks around her. Bennett thought about that for a long moment before picking up his notebook. Claire read the copy in Bennett's office that afternoon without speaking for nearly a full minute. Rain hammered softly against the windows while traffic hissed below on wet pavement. Finally, she looked up. She wasn't crazy. No. The certainty in Bennett's voice surprised even him slightly. Claire swallowed. She really believed something was happening. Yes, but believing isn't proof. No. Bennett took the complaint back carefully. But patterns matter. He laid 3 additional documents beside it. 2 other mothers had filed neonatal concerns during the same week. Not identical, but similar enough to tighten something unpleasant inside his chest. One reported temporary bracelet discrepancies. Another reported extended nursery restrictions after birth. Both complaints had been closed internally within 24 hours. No external review, no follow-up. Cleaned quietly. Claire stared at the pages. How many women complained? I don't know yet, and nobody investigated. Bennett gave her a look. She answered her own question immediately. Wealthy donors, that helps. And the church, that also helps. Claire stood abruptly and crossed toward the rain-darkened window. They just decided who deserved children? We don't know that. But you think it. Bennett considered carefully before answering. I think people with power often confuse preference with morality. She folded her arms tightly. My mother spent 40 years terrified of hospitals. Yes. And Evelyn Pike died insisting somebody took her child. Yes. Claire turned toward him slowly. What if both women were telling the truth the entire time? The office fell quiet. Even the jazz had ended. Bennett looked down at the complaint forms again, then at the administrative signatures beneath them. One name appeared on every closure authorization. Sister Miriam Castaigne, not proof, but proximity, always proximity. That evening, Bennett drove to Rochester to meet Daniel Pike for the first time. Daniel answered the apartment door cautiously, chain lock still attached. Reasonable man, Bennett thought immediately, mid-40s, broad shoulders, permanent exhaustion around the eyes. You're the detective. That depends who's reviewing my invoices. Daniel stared at him for a second, then snorted unexpectedly and opened the door. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of laundry detergent and black coffee. No photographs visible anywhere. Interesting. Daniel sat at the kitchen table while Bennett removed a thin folder from his coat. You knew your mother believed something happened at Saint Agnes. Daniel nodded slowly. She talked about it for years. Did you believe her? No. Honest answer. Immediate. Better than certainty. She became obsessive after my father left, Daniel continued. Always talking about nurses changing things. Looking at me strangely sometimes, as if, Daniel hesitated, as if she was checking whether I belonged to her. The sentence lingered heavily between them. Bennett studied him quietly. Did that affect you? Daniel laughed once without humor. What do you think? Fair point. Bennett slid Evelyn's complaint copy across the table. Daniel read silently. His expression changed gradually as he reached the underlined sentence. They keep correcting the bracelets after taking the babies away. That's her handwriting, Daniel said softly. You're sure? Yes. Bennett watched him carefully. Not grief this time. Recognition. Much harder to fake. Daniel looked up slowly. She wasn't imagining this, was she? Bennett didn't answer immediately. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the apartment walls before disappearing again into the rain. Finally, I think, Bennett said carefully, your mother noticed something everyone else learned to ignore. Chapter 7. The Missing 48 Hours. Bennett spent the next morning staring at a gap. Not a metaphorical one. An actual gap. 48 hours of administrative records from Saint Agnes Hospital had disappeared. Not entirely. That would have been easier to understand. The surrounding documents remained intact. March 12. March 13. Then fragments. Then March 16. Like a paragraph torn from the middle of a book. People who destroyed evidence usually removed too much. People protecting institutions removed only what they thought mattered, which often left fingerprints around the edges. Bennett sat in the archives with a legal pad beside him, reconstructing the missing period from whatever survived. Nursing schedules, payroll logs, maintenance reports, supply orders, the kind of records nobody bothered hiding because nobody expected them to become important. He had learned years ago that conspiracies focused on secrets. Reality focused on paperwork. By noon, he had assembled a rough timeline. Something unusual had happened during those 2 days, not because of what was written, because of who was suddenly present. Several administrators appeared repeatedly in internal movement logs. Hospital counsel, a donor relations representative, Sister Miriam, and a physician named Dr. Harold Vance. The name appeared 13 times in 48 hours, then vanished from the records almost entirely. Bennett circled it. 13 was a lot. Ariadianst, Claire arrived carrying sandwiches neither of them had asked for. You look terrible. Professional consistency. She handed him one. You find anything? Maybe. That was Bennett's version of optimism. He slid the reconstructed timeline across the table. Claire studied it carefully. I don't understand what I'm looking at. Neither do I yet. Helpful. He pointed toward a cluster of entries. Dr. Harold Vance. Who is he? Chief obstetrician in 1984. Why does he matter? Because he suddenly became very busy during the exact period records started behaving strangely. Claire looked down. Is he alive? I checked. And? He died in 2011. Her shoulders slumped. Another door closed. Another witness gone. Bennett understood the feeling. Cold cases were conversations with ghosts. The problem was that ghosts rarely clarified anything. Later that afternoon, he located Vance's retirement interview in a local medical journal. Most of it was forgettable. Awards, professional milestones, anecdotes about hospital expansion. Then one paragraph caught Bennett's attention. Vance described Saint Agnes as a place where we occasionally had to make difficult family decisions in the best interest of the child. Bennett read the sentence twice, then a third time. Doctors chose words carefully when writing professionally, especially retired doctors. Family decisions, not medical decisions, not clinical decisions, family decisions. He tore the page from the photocopy and slipped it into his folder. He thought about Evelyn Pike walking into St. Agnes 39 years ago, carrying her complaint, writing her careful sentences, insisting on being heard, and somewhere in the same building, men like Vance, writing careful sentences of their own. Decisions in the best interest of the child, the two sets of words sitting on opposite sides of the same locked door. That evening, he called Naomi Bell again. The nurse connected them through a speakerphone in Naomi's room. At first her memory wandered. Weather, meals, the wrong decade. Then Bennett mentioned Dr. Harold Vance. Silence, a long one. Naomi? I remember him. Her voice sounded suddenly sharper. He was kind, interesting, not what Bennett expected. Did he work closely with Sister Miriam? Yes. How closely? Another pause. He argued with her. Now that was interesting. Bennett sat forward. About what? I don't know. You heard arguments? Once. What happened? Naomi struggled for several seconds, memory arriving slowly. He kept saying we couldn't keep doing it. The room seemed to narrow around the words. What couldn't they keep doing? I don't know. Her voice weakened again. They sent me home after that. Who did? No answer. Naomi, nothing. The clarity had already faded. The nurse gently took back the phone. She's tired. Bennett thanked her and ended the call, then sat motionless for nearly a minute. We can't keep doing it. Not proof. Not even close. But for the first time, someone inside St. Agnes had appeared to disagree, which meant the system had not been unanimous, and that mattered, because unanimity was harder to crack than guilt. Near midnight, Bennett found himself reviewing the complaint files again. Evelyn Pike, 2 additional mothers, 3 women, 3 complaints, same week, same administrative responses, same closure language. Then he noticed something he should have seen earlier. The complaint dates, March 13, March 14, March 14. Clustered, almost simultaneous, as if several women had become concerned at once. Not over months, not over years, immediately. Bennett leaned back slowly. If 3 mothers were questioning the nursery during the same 48-hour period, then the problem probably wasn't one child, or one mistake, or one family. It was something larger, something systemic. The realization settled heavily in the room. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window, and for the first time, Bennett began wondering whether Claire's case was simply the surviving thread of a much bigger story. Chapter 8. The Family That Asked No Questions. The Voss family home sat behind iron gates and mature oak trees on the north side of the city. Old money, not flashy money, the dangerous kind. Money that no longer needed to impress anyone. Claire stared through the windshield as Bennett parked across the street. "You think this is a good idea?" "No." "Then why are we here?" "Because good ideas rarely generate witness statements," Claire sighed. That answer had become frustratingly familiar. Miel den eyes. Jenna Voss answered the door herself. Mid-40s. Well-dressed, carefully composed, the kind of person who looked perpetually prepared for a charity gala. She listened politely while Bennett introduced himself. Then her expression changed slightly when he mentioned Saint Agnes Hospital. Not alarm, recognition. A tiny difference. "Come in," she said. "Interesting. People hiding things usually preferred doorways. Inside, the house was immaculate. Family photographs lined the walls. Graduations, vacations, birthdays. Evidence of stability curated over decades. Jenna led them into a sitting room overlooking a snow-covered garden. "Why are you investigating St. Agnes?" Bennett exchanged a brief glance with Claire, then chose honesty. "Because several birth records from 1984 contained irregularities." Jenna went very still, not visibly, but enough. "I see. You've heard this before?" "No." "Too fast." Bennett noticed. So did Claire. Under 20 minutes, the conversation remained polite. Almost frustratingly so. Jenna answered questions carefully. Her parents had donated heavily to St. Agnes. Yes, she had been born there. Yes, her mother had passed away years earlier. Yes, nothing useful. Then Bennett changed direction. "What was your relationship with your mother like?" The question surprised her. "Good." Witnesses prepared for facts, not emotions. Jenna looked down briefly. "Complicated." "How?" "She loved me." The answer arrived immediately. The rest took longer. "She was also anxious." "About what?" Jenna hesitated, then laughed softly. "Me." Claire looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "My mother worried constantly that something would happen to me." Jenna looked toward the garden. "She checked on me obsessively as a child." Bennett remained silent, letting the memory expand. "She used to tell me I was a miracle." Her voice softened. "Not unusual." "No." Jenna smiled faintly. "Except, she said it like she'd nearly lost me." Nobody spoke for several moments. Then Bennett asked, "Did she ever mention St. Agnes?" Jenna's expression changed. Tiny, but real. "Yes." The room went still. "What did she say?" Jenna stared out at the snow. For several seconds, Bennett thought she might refuse entirely. Instead, "She once told me there were things she regretted." Claire leaned forward slightly. "Did she explain?" "No." "What exactly did she say?" Jenna swallowed, then repeated the words carefully. "As long as you're safe." "Some questions aren't worth asking." The sentence landed heavily, because it sounded less like advice and more like justification. Oh. They left an hour later with almost nothing tangible. No documents, no confessions, no dramatic revelations. Yet Bennett felt more unsettled than before. Claire sensed it too. You're thinking. Always. No. You're really thinking. Fair point. The city lights blurred across the wet windshield as they drove downtown. Finally, Claire spoke. Do you think Jenna knows? I think Jenna suspects. Suspects what? That her mother spent 40 years protecting something. Claire looked out the passenger window. My mother did the same thing. Yes. The realization seemed to hit her all over again. Different families. Different lives. Same fear. Same silence. Memel demum both. Back at the office, Bennett found a voicemail waiting. The message had been left an hour earlier. Male voice. Elderly. Measured. Mr. Crowe. My name is Arthur Bellamy. I served on the Saint Agnes Hospital board in 1984. The message continued. I think you've been asking questions about events from that period. A slight crackle followed. Then, there are things you should know before you speak to the wrong people. The voicemail ended. No explanation, no details, just a callback number. Bennett replayed it twice, then a third time. Not because of the words, because of the tone. Arthur Bellamy did not sound frightened. He sounded tired. And after 40 years, tired people often told the truth more readily than guilty ones. Chapter 9. What They Told Themselves. Arthur Bellamy lived in a modest apartment overlooking the river. The building surprised Bennett. Former hospital board members tied to wealthy institutions rarely retired somewhere this ordinary. Claire seemed surprised too. You expected a mansion. I expected better carpeting. The hallway carpet looked older than both of them. That at least felt honest. Arthur Bellamy answered the door himself. 87. Thin, sharp-eyed. The kind of man whose body had aged faster than his mind. He studied Bennett for a moment before stepping aside. You're younger than I expected. I hear that whenever someone owes me money. Bellamy laughed once. A good sign. Not because he was friendly, because genuinely dangerous people rarely laughed before difficult conversations. Inside, the apartment was quiet. No television, no radio, only books. Hundreds of them. History, philosophy, religion. The shelves told Bennett something important immediately. Arthur Bellamy was a man who liked explanations, which meant he had probably spent 40 years constructing one. They sat around a small dining table overlooking the gray river. Bellamy poured tea. Claire accepted. Bennett accepted because refusing would have slowed things down. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, Bellamy broke the silence. You've been investigating Saint Agnes. Yes. And you've spoken to Sister Miriam. Yes. Bellamy nodded slowly. Then you've probably decided she's a villain. The statement caught Bennett slightly off guard. Have I? Most people do. Bellamy stared into his tea. She wasn't. Claire's jaw tightened. Children may have been taken from their mothers. Bellamy looked at her sadly. Yes. Not denial, not defense, just agreement. The room became very still. You knew, Claire said. Bellamy closed his eyes briefly. I knew pieces. What pieces? He exhaled slowly. The hospital received constant pressure from donors, social workers, churches, judges. Pressure for what? Bennett asked. For solutions. The word landed badly. Bellamy seemed to recognize that. He continued anyway. Many young mothers arrived alone. Poor. Unmarried. Frightened. Some had nowhere to go. And wealthy families wanted children, Bennett said. Yes. Bellamy looked down at his hands. At the time, many people convinced themselves they were helping. The phrase echoed Naomi Bell's warning almost perfectly. People convinced themselves, not criminals, not masterminds. People. Claire stared at him. You're talking about human beings. I know. You're talking about babies. I know. His voice cracked slightly for the first time. I know. The story emerged slowly after that. Not because Bellamy resisted, Because memory itself resisted. 40 years had blurred edges and softened certainty, but the broad outline remained. Saint Agnes operated a quiet support network, officially housing assistance, counseling, adoption referrals. Unofficially, things became less clear. Records moved, paperwork appeared incomplete. Informal arrangements happened. Questions received answers nobody documented. No single person controlled it. That was the terrifying part. Everyone participated only a little. Enough to feel innocent. Enough to avoid responsibility. Did babies get switched intentionally? Claire asked. Bellamy looked at her for a long time, then answered carefully. I think some people stopped caring whether paperwork reflected reality. The room went silent, because everybody understood what that meant. Not mistakes. Not exactly. Worse. Indifference. Bennett took out Evelyn Pike's complaint file. Bellamy recognized it immediately. I remember her. Claire leaned forward. You do? Yes. Was she right? Bellamy hesitated, long enough that Bennett already knew the answer. Yes. Claire froze. Bellamy swallowed. She came back repeatedly. What happened? She wouldn't stop asking questions, the same phrase Naomi had used, the same phrase appearing again, like a thread running through the entire case. She kept insisting staff brought different babies. Did anyone investigate? Bellamy laughed bitterly. No. Why not? Because people believed she was emotional. Claire looked away. The answer hurt because it sounded believable. Bellamy stood and crossed toward a bookshelf. For several seconds, he searched among old binders. Then he removed a thin folder. His hands trembled slightly. I should have destroyed this years ago. He handed it to Bennett. Inside sat several copied administrative notes. Most were mundane. Meeting schedules, budget requests. Then Bennett found a memorandum dated March 15, 1984. The author, Dr. Harold Vance. The recipient, Hospital Board Executive Committee. Only a few lines remained legible. Most of the page had faded with age. But one sentence survived clearly. Current nursery identification procedures are no longer reliable and present unacceptable risk. Bennett read it twice, then a third time. Dr. Vance had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. And unlike everyone else, he had written it down. When they finally left, dusk had already fallen. Claire sat silently during the entire drive back. Streetlights slid across the windshield. Neither spoke. Eventually she broke. Why? The question emerged quietly. Not angry, not demanding, just exhausted. Why didn't anyone stop it? Bennett considered the city lights ahead, then answered honestly. Because most disasters don't require bad people. Claire looked toward him. They require ordinary people? Yes. Ordinary people who decide somebody else will fix it. That night, Bennett sat alone in his office, with the Vance memorandum beside the complaint files. He already knew who had killed Evelyn Pike. He had known since the first Sister Miriam interview. Since the moment she said tragic without flinching. Since the conviction behind her eyes that never softened into guilt. Knowing and proving were different conversations. But there was one conversation left to have. Sister Miriam received him the following morning without surprise. The administrator tried to intervene at the door. Bennett walked past her politely. Sister Miriam was already sitting beside the window. Same chair, same posture, gardening magazine folded in her lap, as if she had been expecting him. Evelyn Pike, Bennett said. Sister Miriam looked up calmly. You followed her the night she died. No response. The photograph shows a Saint Agnes identification badge. The figure matches your build, your height. He paused. The purse was left behind because robbery was never the point. Sister Miriam looked out toward the garden for a long moment. Then, she would have destroyed everything. Her voice was completely calm. the calm of someone who had never once doubted herself. Everything you'd built, Bennett said. Everything we had done for those children. For those children, Bennett repeated quietly. They had stable homes, educated parents, security, futures. Evelyn Pike had a future. Evelyn Pike had nothing. The room went very still. Bennett studied her. Not a monster, never a monster. Something worse. A person of absolute faith in her own judgment. I won't be charged, she said simply. I'm 81. The evidence is 40 years old. You know this. Yes. Then why are you here? Bennett stood slowly. Because she deserved someone to say it aloud. Sister Miriam looked back toward the garden and said nothing more. Bennett called Hugo Wren from the parking lot. Wren answered on the third ring. I know why you're calling. Then I'll be brief, Bennett said. The witness statement that disappeared from Evelyn Pike's file. The donor connection to Saint Agnes. The investigation that closed too cleanly. Silence on the line. You covered it. A long pause. Traffic moved somewhere behind Wren's end of the call. Finally. I had a daughter born at Saint Agnes that same year. Bennett said nothing. They told me there had been a bracelet error, that it had been corrected. Wren's voice was flat, empty. I chose to believe them. And Evelyn Pike? Another silence, longer this time. She was going to pull everything apart. His voice cracked slightly. I told myself I was protecting the families. You were protecting yourself. No answer. Because no answer was needed. Is your daughter yours? Bennett asked quietly. The longest pause of all. I've never looked, Wren said. I don't think I can. Bennett stood in the cold parking lot for a moment after ending the call, then got in his car and drove. Some truths resolved cleanly. Others simply became part of the weight people carried. He was nearly back to the city when his phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Only 4 words. I found my mother. Chapter 10. The Mothers and the Children. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the river. Cold wind moved through rows of weathered headstones. As Bennett climbed the path beside Claire the following morning, gray clouds hung low overhead. The kind of sky that seemed unwilling to make promises. Claire carried a small bouquet of white flowers. Neither spoke much. Some moments demanded witnesses more than conversation. All Beale gone. Evelyn Pike's grave was modest. Small stone, simple inscription, almost forgotten. 42 years of rain had softened the lettering. Claire stopped several feet away. For a long moment she simply stared, not moving, not speaking. Bennett remained behind her, giving grief room whenever possible. Eventually Claire stepped closer. Her fingers brushed lightly across the stone. She was 23. Yes, she spent weeks trying to convince people something was wrong. Yes, Claire swallowed hard. And everyone ignored her. Bennett looked out across the cemetery. Not everyone. She glanced back toward him. Dr. Vance. Yes. Naomi Bell. Yes. And maybe others. Probably. The answer seemed to comfort her slightly. Not enough, but slightly. Fine. They stood there for several minutes before Claire finally spoke again. Do you think she knew? Knew what? That I was her daughter. Bennett considered carefully. This mattered. Truth mattered. Especially here. I think she believed something was wrong. Claire nodded slowly. You don't know. Nay. Neither does anyone else. No. The honesty hurt, but false certainty would have hurt more. Later that afternoon, Bennett met Daniel Pike at the cemetery gates. The meeting felt strange. Not because of who they were, because of who they might be. Brother and sister, or not. Victims of the same system. Almost certainly. But biology still remained frustratingly incomplete. Daniel stood beside Claire awkwardly at first. 2 strangers sharing overlapping histories, neither sure what belonged to whom. Finally, Daniel laughed softly. Our mother would have hated this. Claire smiled through tears. Mine too. For the first time, the tension eased. Just slightly. Human beings finding each other amid paperwork and tragedy. Maybe that mattered more than answers. Litium inventuma. Several weeks later, the investigation's findings reached local journalists. Not through Bennett. He disliked reporters. But information escaped eventually. It always did. The resulting review uncovered additional complaint records. More administrative discrepancies. More forgotten files. No criminal charges followed. Most responsible parties were dead. Others were impossible to prosecute. The law preferred clean timelines. Cold cases rarely offered them. Yet the review produced something else. Acknowledgement. Former patients came forward. Families asked questions. Records were reopened. Not enough. Never enough. But something. One rainy evening, nearly a month later, Claire returned to Bennett's office, carrying a cardboard box. You moving? No. She set the box on his desk. Inside sat copies of every document from the investigation. Organized. Labeled. Professional. Claire had always been good at that. What am I supposed to do with this? Keep it. Why? She smiled faintly. Because you'll never throw it away. Fair. Bennett looked through the files. Complaint reports. Administrative records. The Vance Memorandum. Evelyn Pike's photograph. 40 years of silence, reduced to a few inches of paper. Minnenavel Emerof Intendapsch, Minnenisen der Minnensten. One more thing. Bennett waited. She looked around the cluttered office. The boxes, the files, the rain beyond the windows. Then, do you think we solved it? A good question. Maybe the only question. Bennett leaned back in his chair. Miles Davis drifted softly through the speakers again. Outside, headlights reflected across wet pavement. Finally he answered. I think we found the truth. Claire nodded. And Bennett looked down at the stack of records, at the complaints no one listened to, at the warnings nobody followed, at the children who grew up carrying questions they could never quite name. Then he looked back at her. The solving part would have been easier if people had done their jobs in 1984. For a second she laughed. Then so did he. The sound lingered briefly in the office before fading into the rain. And for the first time in 42 years, the story of Saint Agnes Hospital no longer belonged to the people who had hidden it. It belonged to the people who survived it. End of story. Please like and subscribe to support our channel and to listen to more free audiobooks.